Om Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Om Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Om Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Here we are talking about an important aspect of the study, wherein in comparison to the European rationalism, where they are talking about rationalism also, is the intelligible, which can be European rationalists believe that at least 4 different kinds of things cannot be deduced from the sense data. So that we have seen mathematics, logic, moral principles, and natural law that they are talking. But the parallel to that we have in the Buddhism Abhidharma studies, where studies of the dharmas that we experience, phenomena that we experience, mental phenomena. And with regard to that, what he's saying is, even though these lists are developed in the presentations of Abhidharma Pitaka, Abhidharma Pitaka, as we said, Tripitaka has 3 segments, 3 parts. Sutra Pitaka means the spoken words of the Buddha, and the Vinaya Pitaka is the discipline of the monks, and the third is the Abhidharma. Abhidharma is about the dharmas, is more of a phenomenological study, we can say. So here, even though it is like that, it is not simply that, and you need to follow it up with a direct experience, wherein the statement of the Buddha is mentioned here, of the dharma as the delivered see it. The Buddha says that it is profound, hard to see, difficult to perceive, calm, sublime, not within the sphere of merely abstract thought. Avatarka, atarka achara, avachara, subtle, to be atarka avachara. Atarka avachara. Subtle, to be experienced only by judicious sages. Ready-made concepts are of no avail here. And what lies beyond the perceptible world of appearances also transcends the realm of logical thought. Very important. Here, ready-made concepts are of no avail here. Of course, concepts are being presented, but they are of no help, because you need to transcend these concepts. And what lies beyond the perceptible world of appearances also transcends the realm of logical thought. So not only we need to cross the perceptible world, but also the logical world we need to transcend. That's where it said, the rational approach is only provisional and preparatory, not final. Number 2, the choice and definition of dharmas recognized by the Abhidharma is not the result of independent examination, but leans heavily on the pronouncements of the Lord Buddha. This is not an experiment to be done in the lab about the mental states. It's not that. These are the dharmas which are pronounced by the Buddha. That is what is the content of the Abhidharma. The choice and definition of the dharmas recognized by the Abhidharma is not the result of independent examination, but leans heavily on the pronouncements of the Lord Buddha. The practice of Abhidharma presupposes not only a knowledge of the items reckoned by tradition as dharmas, but also a willingness to accept just them as ultimate facts in their own right. So those are the facts that have been spoken by the Buddha, and we take them and study them. Number 3, only a Buddha or Arhata has experiences sufficiently wide or deep to test the whole range of the truth, and their testimony is therefore the one ultimate source and guarantee of truth for all except the fully enlightened. So here the importance is given to the words of the Buddha to all of us, common people, and only exception is those who are directly enlightened. Only a Buddha or Arhat has experiences sufficiently wide or deep to test the whole range of the truth. And their testimony is therefore the one ultimate source and guarantee of the truth for all except the fully enlightened. Number 4. But if the truth of the Dharma cannot be wholly established by reason, does the rationality of Buddhism perhaps consist in that it teaches nothing that is incompatible with reason? But if the truth of Dharma cannot be wholly established by reason, does the rationality of Buddhism perhaps consist in that it teaches nothing that is incompatible with reason? That is what he is asking. So is it that it does not teach anything other than reason? Other than that which complies with reason? This has often been asserted. No objective criterion does, however, separate the inherently reasonable from the inherently unreasonable. No objective criterion means we cannot make up an objective criteria from outside. Does, however, separate the inherently reasonable from the inherently unreasonable. So whatever is given, that is it. We cannot frame rules of reasonableness from outside, unreasonable from outsideness to establish what is already existing there. Rationality depends on our habit of thought. Rationality depends on our habits of thought and on what we are brought up to believe. Rationality depends on our habits of thought and on what we are brought up to believe. If sufficient thought is applied to it, any proposition, however absurd it may seem at first sight, can be made to appear plausible. If sufficient thought is applied to it, any proposition, however absurd it may seem at first sight, can be made to appear plausible. So this is a very important point to understand. You cannot establish reality by this rational, thought-based approach. That's what it means. Whatever is already real is already rational. We cannot make rules which are conditioned by our habits, habituation, conditioning. We frame rules to determine what is rational and unrational. That cannot be applied to reality, because this is a process, this is a this approach of reasoning is already conditioned by our mind, brain and intellect. If sufficient thought is applied to it, any proposition, however absurd it may seem at first sight, can be made to appear plausible. This may be seen by anyone who has watched a Thomistically trained Catholic argue in favor of miracles, the virgin birth of Christ, or even the bodily assumption of the Blessed Virgin. So because they also come up with some logic, that's what it means. Likewise, when they see fit, the Buddhists are capable of displaying a great deal of sweet reasonableness. But in the end, this reasonableness is used to beguile people into accepting the most amazing deviations from common sense. Likewise, when they see fit, the Buddhists are capable of displaying a great deal of sweet reasonableness. But in the end, this reasonableness is used to beguile people into accepting the most amazing deviations from common sense. So the logic is not going to establish the reality. That's what it means. Okay? Bitter and incredible as it must seem to the contemporary mind, Buddhism bases itself first of all on the revelation of the truth by an omniscient being known as the Buddha, and secondly on the spiritual intuition of saintly beings. First is the Buddha, and then secondly by the spiritual intuition of saintly beings. In all disputes, the ultimate appeal is, however, not to the experience of Tom, Dick, and Harry, but to that of the fully enlightened Buddha, as laid down in the Buddha world. Unlike the Christians, the Buddhists had no small, portable, definitive, though extremely ambiguous gospel recognized and accepted by all. In consequence, they had some difficulties in arriving at a criterion of the authenticity of a sacred text. But the resulting embarrassments fall outside the scope of this book. So fundamentally, here he has laid down the tacit assumptions about the basis of Buddhist thought and Buddhist evolution is based on the yogic experiences, not on the empirical observations of the European science, but it is rational within itself. It is not to be judged from outside, because outside our rationalism, logic inference, to say, based on our mind is really not useful, because it can cook up some justification somehow over a repeated thinking. So the authority is of the spoken word of the Buddha and the saints who went through the same rigorous practices of yoga. So these assumptions have to be well understood, and then in that spirit, when we listen to the teachings of the Buddha, we will be greatly benefited. Of course, I read through the initial chapter 1 of the part 1, which I think it took a long time, though it is about 15 pages. It took sufficient time. People who are listening to this may have their own difficulty with my ability to read, but I somehow feel that people will be rewarded if they are able to put up with this and go through the text, because the way he has discussed the important points of an approach to this philosophy and experience, we have to cultivate that, without which we will not see the fruit of any religious practice. So I hope that people do see and appreciate the great wisdom of Edward Conze and benefit from his book. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.